Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Feeling Thursday Battle Lounge with the 2MKG. Do I actually want to be in here now? Let's go with it. Feel free to join in this lounge at any point. This is our NA lounge, and that means that we will be probably a good connection to anyone on the east coast of the United States, and quite likely in the Midwest portion of the United States as well. In fact, if you live anywhere on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, so the western parts of Europe, if your connection's good enough, probably also fine. Today is just basically getting used to characters, new characters especially. Not from my side necessarily. My opponents may have some face-offs with Geese, and there was a patch a while back that mostly changed the speed of startup of heavy moves and sped up the game as a whole a bit. Also changing that sort of obnoxious light kick pressure, but we're still going to make the bot based on figuring out how to deal with certain aspects of the light kick pressure, so expect to see a Robert bot in about a week or so. Aha! This character is when we're actually need a full spin fall. Yep, there we go. As long as you are in Mary's proximity in general, she will grab you, even if it doesn't seem like she should be able to. Generally, you should try to stay closer to this character, because if you have to be ready for everything she does all the time, but spend your time waiting for her to do those things, then the player will just control that spacing so you won't be able to do it. However, against Chizuru she has much less capacity for doing these things. Neither the spin fall nor her standard attack spaces are necessarily going to work all that well. She can do it on knockdowns and try to get some space that way. But you gotta hope a lot, and hoping a lot in this game is not the best idea. Fortunately, Chizuru has a much harder time against Geese for various reasons. Though Geese does mostly rely on the grounded Rapuken, he has an air fireball, and it kinda messes with this character. He does not have to jump backward either, but it does cost you meter to keep on going forward. Fortunately, because he does go backwards, it's one of the easier ones to go through, as long as he is going back in the air, chances are you can just dodge through the projectile and at least have a good position. A lot of characters, that's not such a great position to be in, but for characters like Chizuru who have trouble with the fireball otherwise, like if she's trying to actually do attacks, then she'll normally be close enough to do some of her own moves at max range and have things work out.
Round one. Ready? Go!
While motion is a good general way to deal with this matchup, particularly certain specific dodges, you'll find that most of the time Chris has more trouble getting into the right position than anything else. Basically because you must always move fast enough that Mary doesn't move first, or be ready to counter something she does which could in turn just be a bait. Always watch out for when a player is trying to upset or stress you out by doing things with Mary that aren't actually intended to hit you. Angel can do a big conversion from here because getting close to Geese for her is a little bit easier than for other characters. She can switch sides easily, and once she does land even slightest hits, tends to get through a lot of things. Your better bet is often to not be on the ground or to be reliant on the Replucan enough that you don't have the problem. But this happens if you're not on the ground, so... Technically though, that's not a bad thing to happen overall from my side, because if the match can be kept short enough, that was using a lot of meter to get to a position where Geese still has mostly the meter required. You can see here that she can reach to deal with the Replucan itself easily enough that you're better off just doing this a lot of the time. The real answer is to use your meter differently, but then your opponent could easily counter by using their own, so you have to at least try to get the neutral one. And this matchup is relatively easier, at least for me. This is particularly true with Iori's new faster normals. He can lock Chizuru out of a lot of positions that he couldn't before, even if he can't punish the same types of thing. Basically, their moves don't interact in a way that generally benefits Chizuru that much. And he has similar range. What he doesn't usually have is flexibility, so you're often making a fairly big bet, and if your opponent continues to be defensive, then you have to slow your entire thing down yourself. It usually leads to a harder matchup if you don't time your projectiles correctly. Well, ground sparks correctly. Okay, I have no idea what was up with that. But I'm probably not going to play again, so let's see if it's hit to break, then come off break, then put myself... okay, not this time.
Select members. Select order.
Are we seeing Ramona's point today?
Select stage.
I think this might be harder against Chris as a generality. Chris has more ways to reach quickly, so Ramon neutral, while good, isn't quite as strong. Athena has to commit to much more complex, longer things most of the time, and her normals aren't quite as good as certain things Chris can do. So it'll be interesting to see what Ramon does in terms of getting out of range if necessary, or if it's just going to be the same standard neutral that normally gets played. Because it's not like the character needs a ton of meter to do things. It's just kind of odd. Yeah, that sort of thing. This is compounded by the fact that Chris actually has a dive kick, which means that anti-airs are more complicated. And Ramon, being a character who can be faked out by that dive kick, makes it even harder. He also operates at a max range where Chris's, let's call it command grab, is more effective. Ramon generally needs to stand at the spot where he is at least susceptible to that move. So it doesn't seem as if it worked out as well. But it is going to be salvaged, at least partially now, by Joe, because Joe does a much better job of keeping Chris in position. And also of punishing and maintaining spacing after the punishes even fail. Chris also has a lot of moves that involve rushing, which means that you have to be very much more precise about how you punish the Bakuretsu. And Joe just has better damage against this character. So, while it did end up with some health loss, possibly more than one might want, and definitely meter usage, this isn't like top tier Joe play here yet. So you get to see a lot more of the problems in the matchup that don't come up as much when the players are more aware of those problems or stronger. Angel, on the other hand, tends to go through things with her movement a little bit differently, and that makes it faster. You can get around more of Joe's stuff and not worry as much about taking damage. And this matchup, I'd say, is mostly even, with the main difference here being that because Chizuru is the final character here and has meter, she can do stuff like that.
Player one wins. Final round.
I don't usually have too much to say about this matchup because it really depends heavily on how the king player decides to approach it. Properly spaced attacks are basically not a problem. She'll just get to keep doing them. But even the slightest error tends to lead to Chizuru getting some dominance going pretty quickly.
Round one. Ready? Go!
So much of KOF, especially if you watch it at high levels, is just about making your opponent block moves that then put you at a position on screen that benefits you and is not great for them. While damage does absolutely come into it, understanding does this block stun benefit me in this matchup is probably the first thing you should be thinking about. Hitboxes and hurtboxes come up a lot, but if you're not too familiar with how those work in the first place, it's still easier to start the thought from, if I do this move and my opponent blocks it, do they have better moves than I have from that spot? This means that characters like Joe, who can do basically full screen moves, even though those moves are punishable, sometimes the fact that they're also relatively unreactable at certain ranges means that you might still be able to decide. If you've decided, if I do this, my opponent's good moves will all be punishable if I just block them, so you could just block them. But it does mean that your opponent might have similar defensive thoughts, realizing if I do this move, all that's going to happen is that you're going to block it and I'm going to die. And that awareness would then allow them to change the way they think about it. Spending time trying to make sure that this isn't what you're dealing with in terms of spacing ends up being really important, particularly when you're learning characters. Alright then, back in line I go. And we now have a new player appearing. This is usually a lounge that allows rematches despite the length of time this takes. Bear this in mind because if you feel like you don't really learn much from your match and you don't feel like you have a plan, it's probably fine to just not rematch it. Particularly if you are watching stream and like need time to absorb, check, disagree with anything that I have to say.
It's about to be a party up in here.
But on the subject of new characters, both Yamazaki and Mijine are appearing now. Is that Shyflower or Skyflower? I missed it, I'm sorry. Yamazaki is a fairly easy character to understand. He's either usually very close or ready to counter you from mid-range. He's not terribly strong at very far, but he does have some options. That said, you shouldn't use this as a to jump away from him and then start doing things. Neither projectiles nor long lunging moves are necessarily the answer to the situation. It's just understanding that when you are really far away from him, you're not necessarily in danger. So if you needed to catch your breath, needed to check your strategy or something, you've got a little bit of time. At least until your opponent rushes at you. He is, however, quite good at running at you and then stopping and doing something else. The longer your character's buttons are, the better your options are in this situation. So, Joe is a pretty good fit for this matchup, just because he can just hit kick, and that will help him with some stuff. Having your own lunging moves isn't necessarily helpful. You just get beat up sometimes. It makes the matchup much more volatile, so if you don't find that fun, don't think about it too hard. Here we go again. Wait, does that mean we actually get to stay in the room match this time? Off they go, I guess. Unfortunate, but yeah, let's carry on.
order.
Going all out.
Select stage. Get ready for a battle of titans!
So now we have Joe in first slot,
Are you ready?
which is generally better for this matchup, I'd say.
Slicer! Meatball! Slicer!
But because Joe is another one of those, I'm just gonna stand here for a little bit. Characters. You have to be ready with hops and similar things or you're just not gonna get anything. It takes too long, making some of his stuff reactable outright. And baiting him into doing certain things isn't that hard, because his options, while not strictly speaking limited, they don't tend to have two options that cover the same space, so if your opponent is responding optimally with their attack range, it doesn't tend to work out. Oh, I see what's happening. Yes, it is that somehow the wolf stuff is flickery again. Because I thought it was possibly mine, but no, it looks like that's just the flicker we get every week and don't really understand to this day. So it'll be a bit. The lounge itself normally stays up and just changes host, and I can find my way back to it after a bit, but you can consider this our usual midstream break or whatever. And this'll take a while, so just head on back in like 4 minutes, I think it usually is. Oh wait, that is not what I expected to happen at all. Is this even... It is working! That's super weird. Right, well then, back to figuring this out, I guess. This is a good matchup, I feel, for Kukri side. His movement style reduces a lot of what Mary's easily capable of. And she needs a lot of meter to make this one work well. But there's no explicit, hey, there's a thing you should do to solve the problem. It's just watching his movement a lot more closely and thinking not about the move you're doing, but about the move that would have to follow it if he moved. For Geese, this is somewhat easier, but only because of one move as far as I could guess. And I didn't even know that move was going to be a thing before today, so... But it's automatically obvious that this is the better option. You're not going to take much damage for doing it. Your opponent has to spend more time avoiding it, and the time they spend avoiding it is going to end up being helpful in some other way. Anything that forces a character that's normally tricky to take a straightforward approach is effectively a good option, especially if you've got full health to use it with. Because that wasn't much of a sacrifice on my end at all, technically none. Once in close, it's a lot easier to chase backdashes and similar things. Is this gonna work even? Well, it was delayed, but it apparently did work. Hopefully not with another explosion of whatever it is that causes this problem. But you can definitely expect it to be a little jittery, a little slow, maybe not load up things correctly. Here we go though.
Are you ready?
Round one. Ready? Go!
Rolling! Slice the block! Speedball! No big deal.
Player 2 wins!
See you.
So, from the Mary perspective, what do you do here? Neutral jumps help a little bit. Evasion works a little bit. Continuing to pressure is probably your better option most of the time. But overall, you need meter. Nope. Meter and guts. Though to be more fair, Kukri's not terribly good at punishing moves that don't go forward very far.
Now or never.
So interrupting with those might be a good option. Got caught in the cross up.
Player 1 wins!
Because Rebel Kid and the Surprise Rose don't interact, Geese can't really specifically spend a lot of time trying to deal with zoning King in the way you'd expect. However, he can still do the air fireball if he really wants to. Iori has an easier job of it because Iori can just uppercut. And it shuts down a lot more of the things she wants to do. Even though she can zone Iori functionally just as well, she tends to zone from far enough away that you could just dodge through stuff. Still getting used to that.
るわけがなかろう。Select members.
But now a change.
Select order.
あんまり期待しないでね。
Select stage.
Geese can't afford to rely on counters too much against Chris because Chris's moves are different in timing based on how far away he is. And he does have other moves that don't actually hit. They're more so grabs. Simply teleporting to the other side would also be enough to cause a problem, let's say.
やだな。
And because he can change his jump arc and jump timing, yeah, you really don't want to be spending too much time on that. What Geese has as an advantage in this matchup is range. Whereas a lot of characters can't really do anything if Chris does this, Geese doesn't care.
Player 1 wins.
I think if you play that matchup even faster from Chris's side, it's generally more successful because it stops Geese from doing more things. But I'm not actually sure that Geese doing those things is helpful to Geese either, so there might not be a loss to not doing them. That move is plus when it crosses up people. Please be aware of this because it will be really annoying. It's basically, it has such a long startup that they're expecting you to deal with it while it's in the air. Perfectly done. Even dealing with the light Reppuken is probably still a good idea.
Player 1 wins.
Geese builds up a lot of things on spacing because of that. Understanding my opponent's move options from here will make them think to do this move instead. Helps a lot because if you know they're going to do X, you can use the correct counter for X.
Player 2 wins.
Meaning that if you're good enough at spacing, point is still a good place for Geese to work. In fact, it's his traditional position, simply because your opponent doesn't have meter yet to mess with your expectations as much. Chizuru is susceptible to that mostly because so many of her moves move her very slightly that technically she won't know which side she's going to be on. Whereas for Shermie, if you input the right thing, basically just rock the control back and forth and hit 2 punches, something that helps is going to happen. You have to have enough meter for that move to be available, of course, but it's easier than trying to deal with her playing neutral as a whole.
強そう
Round one. Ready? Go!
こっちです上です外れです外れて失礼します
Player one wins.
There's a frame 1 countering invincible command grab.
Stand your ground. Ready? Go!
There you go, perfect example of what you're supposed to do there, just run under it. Focus on getting into position for side switching, run under things as need be, etc. I promise you, even a good Geese player is more stressed out at the idea of you getting to the other side of them than they are to the idea of you getting through their counters. Especially since a lot of the time they want to save the meter for whatever character is next.
行くわよおバカおっとあは行くわよ
The main problem I would say Angel has in this matchup is that she really wants to play grounded neutral to make Shermie miss certain things. But you've got to be really ready for every single thing Shermie does otherwise. Because the character is already thinking about fighting from far away, figuring out if you're going to try to keep her from getting in. So getting to the other side of her is less stressful. She's not thinking about, oh, I'm going to use this move to get you. She can get all the way over there on her own. There's a special. Same deal there. I basically was going to do it and thought to myself, wait, can she actually fake this? Does she go forward or not? I should have just done the same thing again.
Final round. Ready? Go! Winner!
おとなしく屋敷牢家にこもっていれば苦痛を知らずに済んだもの。
That basically flew by. But we aren't done yet. In fact, we probably got another 2 matches to go.
Select order. Select stage.
Ramon can generally involve and use similar concepts. Just get to the correct space to roll through and then do whatever you want mostly.
It's about to be a party up in here.
Because Geese is again somewhat thinking about how to attack this character. Playing defensively against Ramon is fairly stressful, even for a character with counters, because he could just use different options.
Round 1. Ready? Go!
And he has good enough neutral and long range moves that you can't just use Geese counters and get through stuff. He also won't necessarily respect the Rapuken if he sees it coming from far enough away, because like that, so you just have to get stuck. He moves around so much that that move doesn't really help you, although the light version would probably be better here. Joe, on the other hand, will just shield himself from nearly anything you want to do. So you do have to rely on being ready to counter and thinking about what counters are going to be important. He's also not the easiest character to punish, I find. He does unfortunately have that disadvantage of being a character with a block string that can be countered by frame 1 style moves and invincible moves. So if you get stuck too close to him, he can't really stop punching, so he's the one in danger. But that doesn't help Shermie at all. So defensive play may seem to be the name of the game here, but it requires you to spend too much time on Joe's side worrying about what's going to happen and paying attention to every little movement Shermie makes, which is pretty bad. And this situation is about to happen between Yori and Joe isn't much better.
Stand your ground. Ready? Go!
Despite having really good punishes, Joe tends to put himself into positions where Yori can relatively quickly damage. King, on the other hand, doesn't have this problem, so at least that's good. In fact, most of Yori's approaches tend to get shut down long before he gets there, You can basically stand your ground as king pretty well here. With that being the main thing you need to worry about, and you can use Tornado Kick to go over it. Okay. Okay. Well, people's damage styles are increasing enough, and the understanding of different interactions is increasing enough that we probably won't mind having the rematches in the game, in the lounges, that much going forward. From Geese's side, this is solved mostly by jumping. Mostly by hopping, explicitly, because Geese has a good downward kick that he can use for a bunch of stuff. In fact, you basically use the normal the same way you would do it the other way. You're using it to fake out your opponent, and since Geese has really good anti-airs, basically Ramon isn't given the same options. You don't need to use the blowback one, just the heavy kick one will do. Ramon has anti-airs, but because Geese can just jump and fake you out and not actually be intending to hit you, it gets complicated. Joe has a much better time of dealing with this because he can just anti-air in much more space, so it's not a good idea from Geese's side to do that. That's your go-to move for this matchup a lot of the time. Let Joe get far enough away that it seems like there should be something else to do, and then just do this move. You'd be surprised what it will trade with, and so will Joe. If you can talk Joe into playing the fireball game by using that move enough, then you have free replicates. Which mostly is just a way to build meter, but you still get something out of it. King can counter Geese's jumps much better than most characters, but not the really max ranging ones. There we go, that's how you do that. Shermie can have a hard time here sometimes. Because she's not a character that benefits a lot from rolling in the right places normally, so you might not be practiced in the roll, but you don't actually generally want to try to use the other ways of getting around. This is mainly because the way King defends herself from most things tends to miss Shermie's roll positions, and hitting buttons leads to just getting grabbed in legs. Now you could mostly just jab a lot and hope it would do things with, but you tend to burn up your meter that way. Especially if you're not used to the idea that your opponent could be on either side of you. And you don't really have the option of blocking because you know that the Shermie player is here to grab you. That's like their goal. I am really not sure if I would consider this matchup bad for Mary. Athena has enough movement capacity that a lot of Mary's straightforward attacks don't work, and she can stay out of the way or trade with a lot of Mary's normals as well. What she can't normally do is, she has the same problem as Mai. If Mary neutral jumps a fair amount, Athena's options get, let's call it worse?
Round one.
Riskier, that's a better way to put it. Fortunately, Mary doesn't have as many options of a specific type, so it's easier to cut through her stuff, particularly if your hop game is good. Geese isn't strictly speaking better, but Geese does have better anti-airs. So you can see the opponent spending more time on that side making more sense. I needed the other one, I think. That is not what I expected to happen there. I keep on messing up that move. Yuri is actually not so good at this because Yuri's anti-airs hit weirder. And therefore Athena can just stay moving the entire time. However, if you can get the spacing right, she's not usually as dangerous. I have no idea what that... Oh, there we go. I was there thinking to myself, wait a minute, that's supposed to hit. Why didn't it hit? It's a really heavy spacing related thing here. The lag is definitely not part of the problem. Yuri, you just have to stand about here. Yeah, about right here, and be ready for the opponent to jump a lot, basically. Now this is actually a good thing for Yuri because Yuri isn't going to really hurt you for doing this much. You can do this for a long time before it matters to you. But you, like, my error there was you do not give up that position if you can help it. You do not give up the position, you do not throw the projectiles. But that brings us to close to the end of our stream, so this is probably the last on-stream match of the night. I doubt I'm going to suddenly beat this person, so you can assume that the lounge will stay open for a while, although who is actually in it might change. Just use the number given and you should be able to find it fine. I wonder if climbing works on this. No, it looks like it'll be too slow. Yeah. No, I need it the other way. But you see what I'm talking about. If my opponent jumps back well enough, there's not really a whole bunch of things that Mary does that goes, yes, I'm hitting you now. I'm tracking where you're going and I'm going to solve the problem. Good trick. Timed well. Yep, still surprised that that works out that way, but I can't really complain. It's not like this is a bad thing. It's just not what I thought would happen.
Stand your ground. Ready? Go!
Generally, as I've said many times, get used to the idea that your opponent is going to move away from you whenever they can in these games. Because the less you have to worry about in that space, the more they can easily get out of things. But understanding how to deal with that for Iori is a little bit easier if you can tell when they're going to do it. In this case, not a chance. Generally, Athena is easily dealt with, more so if you straight counter the character. Similarly, if you learn to roll through specific things and your character has a good shielding move that doesn't take too long to start up. But, as said, that brings us to the end of our stream entirely. You can join us next Monday for our Monday Mishmashing Battle Lounge in Street Fighter V. And you can find information about whether or not we are streaming on our Twitter @2_MK_FGC. Bots and other analysis can be found at 2-mk.org. But for now, that's all we've got. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with training and good night, everyone.